من لا نبي بعد نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اقتفى أثره واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إلى علمنا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Inshallah, we'll continue with reading from the book known as Al-Musannaf li Abi Bakr Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Shayba rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 235 after the Hijrah. And we've reached the chapter in the section of the book Kitab al-Tahara, the chapter where the author, he says, Man qala yajzi al-junub ghamsa. Those who say that it is sufficient for the person in a state of Janaabah to simply submerge himself. When we talk about taking a ghusl, as compared to a wudu, for example, and we know that from them are those that hold the view that order is necessary during the wudu, and that likewise there's a conversation surrounding is scrubbing a requirement, a delk. Is that something that is necessary, or is it a necessary part of washing that one scrub and wipe and rub along with the water? Or is the simple fact of water touching a location sufficient? And so these two issues, the issue of ordering, right, arrangement and order of the body parts being washed, as well as the issue of scrubbing and rubbing along with the water, i.e., is it a part of actually washing, have led to the conversation of, is it sufficient for an individual to simply submerge themselves into the water? Because in such a state, there's no necessary order that is being observed. And likewise, by simply submerging, it doesn't require any rubbing or scrubbing along with the water touching the body part. And this also is built off of the conversation of the necessity of washing out the mouth and the nose. Is it necessary to enter water into the two of them during a ghusl? And so these issues all converge to make this topic: is it sufficient for an individual to simply submerge himself into water and that be sufficient enough for him for a ghusl? Chapter: those who say it is sufficient for the one in a state of sexual impurity to simply submerge themselves, i.e., in water. The verifier, Sheikh Al-Shithri, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, he says, قال مالك لابد من إمرار اليد في الغسل على ما تناولته اليد. He says that Imam Malik, he holds the view that it is necessary that the hand pass over whatever the hand can reach when making a ghusl. Imam Malik holds the view that it's necessary to scrub along with water touching the surface of the body, anywhere that the hand can reach. So, for example, we all understand that there are body parts that our hand can't reach. Some of us can't reach certain section on our back. If a person becomes, large in frame, there might be certain parts that they can't reach on their side if they can't reach around. And so whatever the hand can touch, then Imam Malik holds the view that it's necessary that one rub and scrub along with the passing of water on that body part. He says, وَقَالَ الْجَمْهُورِ بِعَدَمِ وُجُوبِهِ وَقَوْلُهُمْ أَرْجَحُ. And the majority, i.e., of the four Imams, Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i, and Ahmed, in this circumstance, they hold the view that it is not an obligation to rub that which the hand can reach along with the passing of water on that body part. So this is where they disagree. And the disagreement is in the issue of, is scrubbing a necessary part of washing? So, for example, we know that wiping doesn't require water. Wiping, when we talk about in wudu, is as long as the hands are moist, then passing them over the location is sufficient. You don't have to have an actual tangible amount of water when wiping. And that's the difference, for example, between it and washing. Washing requires an actual tangible amount of water to come into contact with the surface of the area. But in washing, does it also require a scrub or a rubbing of the hand on that area or not? And so Imam Malik, he says yes, while the majority, they say no. And if you say no, then simply submerging into the water in a way that the water touches every part of the body, then this would be sufficient. And this is why they disagree in this issue. And so this is the topic. He brings first the statement. He says, حدثنا أبو بكر, يعني بقي بن مخلد. He says, حدثنا أبو بكر قال حدثنا أبو خالد عن هشام عن الحسن أنه قال الجنب إذا ارتمس في الماء أجزأه. Abu Bakr, he says that Abu Khalid narrated to us on the authority of Hisham, on the authority of Al-Hasan, who said that the junub individual, the individual in a state of sexual impurity, either tamasa. Irtamasa is on the scale ifta'ala, from ramasa. And I don't know this word. I've actually never used this word before, ramasa. I can extrapolate what it means to submerge, but it's always better to actually see how the Arab used it. الرمس الأثر وقيل بقية الأثر ورمس الدار ما كان من آثاره ورمس الغيث الدار عفاه أو عفاها وأبقى فيها أثر وترمست المنزل تأملت رسمه. إرتمس. This is the wrong word. That's ramasa. Rasama. That's rasama. I'm looking for ramasa. Ramasa. And that's why I knew, because I knew rasama. I was confused for a second. Ramasa. ترمس شجرة لها حب مضلع محزز لا رمس. الرمس الصوت الخفي لا تسمع له رمسا. That's ركزة. ورمس الشيء يرمسه رمسا طمس أثر, to wipe out its effects. ورمسه يرمسه يرمسه رمسا فهو مرموس ورميس دفنه وسوى عليه الأرض. So there you see, ramasa can mean to bury or to level the dirt on top of someone. And you see from there what it means to irtamasa fil ma. Can mean to taghtiya wa sitr, to conceal, to cover up. الصائم يرتمس ولا يختمس. نعم. ورمسناه بالتراب كبسناه. طيب, رمس means to cover up, to submerge. So he says, Yani Hassan al-Basri, if the sexually impure individual completely covers himself in water, then that is sufficient for him. Either tamasa al-junubu fil ma ajza'a, then that is sufficient for him. Now, he says, حدثنا ابن علية عن داود عن الشعبي أنه قال يجزئه رمسه. Ibn Ulayya narrated to us, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba, he said that Ibn Ulayya narrated to us, he said on the authority of Dawood, on the authority of Ash-Sha'bi Amr ibn Sharahil, he said that it is sufficient for him to completely cover himself, i.e. to completely cover himself in the water, to bury himself or submerge himself into the water. He says, حدثنا أبو خالد أن الأوزاعي أن الزهري قال يجزئه رمسه. He says that Abu Khalid narrated to us on the authority of Al-Awza'i, on the authority of Az-Zuhri, who said it's sufficient for him to submerge himself, ramsuhu. It's sufficient for him to put himself under the water, to cover himself in the water. نعم. He says حدثنا وكيع عن مهدي بن ميمون عن شعيب عن أبي العالية أنه قال يجزئ الجنب إذا غاص غوصة ولمس بيديه. Now here he mentions a narration on Abu al-Aliyah from the Tabi'een. He says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Mahdi ibn Maymun, on the authority of Shu'ayb, on the authority of Abu al-Aliyah, who said that it is sufficient for the sexually impure, the junub, when he ghas, when he plunges, when he submerges into the water completely and wipes with his two hands. So here you see Abu al-Aliyah adding the stipulation that an individual, along with completely submerging, they try to wipe themselves with their two hands, i.e. across their body. And so that's closer to the view of Imam Malik, right? While Imam Malik's teacher, like Az-Zuhri, for example, said it was sufficient to just submerge into the water. Here he says, حدثنا أبو معاوية عن مغيرة ابن مسلم أنه قال سألت عكرمة قال قلت له الجنب يغمس في الرنق قال يجزئ من غسل الجنابة قال نعم قلت له الجنب يغمس في الرنق قال يجزئ من غسل الجنابة قال نعم. Right, the wordage of this is how some narrations are sometimes. Ranq is تراب في الماء من القذى ونحوه والرنق بالتحريك مصدر قولك رنق الماء بالكسر ورنق الماء رنقا رنوقا ورنقا ورنق فهو رنق ورنق بالتسكين ترنق كدرة. وقد جمع رنق على رناق كأنه جمع رنيقة. ورنق الماء القليل الكدر يبقى في الحوض. نعم. No. So in this narration, he says that Abu Muawiyah narrated to us on Mughira ibn Muslim, who said, I asked Ikrimah. And so I said to him, Ikrimah, the freed slave of Ibn Abbas, radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, Mughira ibn Muslim, he said, I asked Ikrimah, and so I said to him, the junub, the sexually impure person, if they submerge into the ranq, and the ranq, the word ranq in Arabic, or ranqa, trying to see if there's a better explanation, because you got a ranqa. So the ranq or the ranqa is the cloudy, murky water that might be left at the bottom of a tub, right? When you have a tub and you have, liquid in it, water in it, and the sediment settles to the bottom, and then that water that's left at the bottom of it, right, the last vestiges of the water in the tub and the container, it will become clouded because of all of the sediment and silt and particles that have settled in the bottom of it. And so Mughira ibn Muslim, he says, I asked Ikrimah about a sexually impure person who submerges into the ranq. right, into this murky, cloudy water. Uh, he said, I Mughira ibn Muslim, is that sufficient for him for his ghusl of Janaabah? To which Ikrimah, he said, yes. So Mughira ibn Muslim, he asked Ikrimah, if a sexually impure person submerges himself into the ranq, into this cloudy, murky water, is that sufficient for him for his ghusl for Jumu'ah? I mean, for Janabah? To which Ikrimah, he replied, yes. The next narration, he says, حدثنا وكيع and Sharik and Mughira and Ibrahim في الجنب قال يرتمس في الماء قال يجزئ or يجزئ. Abu Bakr, he says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Sharik, on the authority of Mughira, on the authority of Ibrahim, and Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. He said regarding a person who is sexually impure, Yani Mughira asked Ibrahim. So Mughira in the last narration asked Ikrimah. Here he's asking Ibrahim. If the sexually impure person covers himself in water, to which Ibrahim, rahimahullah, he said, yajzi'u or yujzi'uhu. It's sufficient for him. That is sufficient for him. The next narration, he says, حدثنا يزيد بن هارون and عبد الملك ibn Abi Sulaiman and عطاء أنه قال إن دخل النهر فارتمس فيه أجزاءه. Abu Bakr, he says that Yazid ibn Harun narrated to us on the authority of Abdul Malik ibn Abi Sulaiman, on the authority of Ata ibn Abi Rabah. He said that if a person, yani Ata said that if a person enters into a river and completely covers himself in it, then that is sufficient for him. He says, حدثنا وكيع عن إسرائيل عن جابر عن سالم وعطاء وعامر قالوا الجنب إذا التمس في الماء رمسة أجزاءه. Abu Bakr, he says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Israel ibn Yunus. No, it's Israel ibn Amr al-Sabi'i, صح? Or is it Ibn Yunus? They're both the same grandfather, but I get confused. Is it Israel ibn Yunus or is it Yunus ibn Israel? He's thiqa for sure, but I'm just trying to remember. Is he the son of? Yes, Israel ibn Yunus ibn Abi Ishaq al-Sabili. Now, so he says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Israel, on the authority of Jabir, on the authority of Abdullah, as well as Ata ibn Abi Rabah, as well as أبي بديل عن أبي بديل ابن ورقاء أنه قال سمعت القاسم يقول في الجن يختمس في الماء اختماسه قال إذا تدلك فقد أجزأه. And this narration brings another opinion, and this is the opinion that we can see that Imam Malik had, And it's the view of Al-Qasim. Actually apply to, what is actually considered to be a ghusl and sufficient in that regard. The next narration, he says, حدثنا الشريك عن جابر عن عامر أنه قال يجزئ الجنوب رمسة. He says that Sharik narrated to us on the authority, Sharik, the Qadi, right? We just covered him in your homework assignment and one of the brothers' homework assignments for Al-Alfiyah, Sharik al-Qadi, right? Sharik narrated to us on the authority of Jabir, on the authority of Amr ibn Sharahil al-Sha'bi, right? He said it's sufficient for the sexually impure, for the junub, to submerge or to cover himself at least one time in the water. So this is the opinion and this is the view of, is it necessary to scrub or not? And whoever says that submerging oneself is sufficient. Let's take the next chapter and we'll stop with this one, inshallah. The next chapter, he says, في الجنوب يخرج في حاجته قبل الغسل. This chapter is regarding a person who is sexually impure, handling some of his affairs before bathing. Meaning a person who is sexually impure, can he go on in his daily routine without bathing, or is bathing necessary immediately? I.e., can you delay bathing? And without a doubt, it's not preferable to delay the bath. And this is because the prayer time could approach and you won't be ready to offer salat. Or if the prayer time is already in, the prayer time could leave and you won't have enough time to bathe and pray. And so by taking care of this early on, then you alleviate this dilemma. But at the same point in time, is there any evidence that bathing is an obligation immediately? Or is bathing only an obligation for something other than itself? Meaning, is bathing itself the obligation, or is the obligation salat? And so as long as no salat is obligatory, then there's no obligation to bathe. And the reality, and Allah knows best, is that there's no obligation to bathe except in the way that the religion legislates. And so the religion legislates us to have purity for salah. And so bathing would be obligatory there. And then after that, you can come to issues and topics like the ghusl of Jumu'ah or the ghusl of every 7 days. But those two ghusls are not for sexual impurity. And so the issue here is, if a person is in a state of sexual impurity, do they have to bathe immediately, or can they delay it as long as it doesn't require them to delay the salat past its time? And likewise, a woman, which is less practical, because a woman who is on her period, well, she could have a wet dream, for example, or she could climax from the intimacy that her and her husband have outside of intercourse. And so this woman who is on her period, where she doesn't have to pray, and now she's also in a state of janabah, does she have to bathe immediately? And likewise, when she's in a state of hayd, does she have to bathe immediately when coming off of her menses? So all of these issues connect to this topic of, can a person go out and handle some of their affairs while they are in a state of janabah? The verifier, Sheikh Ash-Shithri, he says that اتفق الأئمة على جواز خروج الجنب قبل اغتساله. He says that the 4 imams are unanimously agreed in the fact that the person who is in a state of janabah can leave their home. They can go out in the street, in the market, outside, before bathing, right? A person might be intimate with their spouse in the morning and then have to take their children to school. Do they have to bathe before taking their children to school, or can they just go and come back and bathe later before going to work, right? These are things that are practical. And so here, Ibn Abi Shaybah, he brings narrations. He says, حدثنا ابن مبارك وابن نمير عن زكريا عن علي بن الأقمر أنه قال سئل أبو الضحى أيأكل الجنب قال نعم ويمشي في الأسواق. Here he says that Ibn Mubarak, as well as Ibn Numair, the 2 of them narrated to us on the authority of Zakaria, on the authority of Ali ibn al-Akbar, who said Abu Duha was asked, can a person in a state of janabah take a meal? Can he eat while he's in that state? We've mentioned before how the Prophet ﷺ, if he was in a state of janabah, he might make wudu, or how other people might saw it suitable to make a ghusl. But here the question is, if a person's in a state of janabah, can they take a meal? And obviously, when you start breaking things down to their smallest part, it becomes obvious, because what is eating? If a person finished relationships with their spouse and then had a chocolate bar, or sat down to a full dinner, right? Both of these things are taking a meal, or taking food, consuming food. And so he said, is the individual who's in a state of janabah able to eat? To which Abu Duha, he said yes. And he can also go out in the marketplace, right? He can go and walk the streets in the market. He can do his shopping, even though he's in a state of janabah. There's no harm in that. The next narration, he says, حدثنا عبدة بن سليمان and الزبرقان. Now, is it Zabruqan or Zibruqan? It's Zabruqan with a fatha. And it's Zabruqan. Yes, it's Zabruqan with a fatha. You see him coming up often. If I'm not mistaken, a Zabruqan is da'if, though. Zabruqan. But that's not our agenda here, talking about reliability versus weakness. Zabruqan ibn Abdullah, no, he's thiqah. الضمري ثقة من السادسة مات سنة 20 يعني سنة 120. الزبرقان ابن عبد الله أخرج له أبو داود قال ابن حجر ثقة. He says that حدثنا عبدة بن سليمان عن الزبرقان عن أبي الرزين أنه قال إني لأكون إني لأكون جنبا فأتوضأ ثم أخرج إلى السوق فأقضي حاجتي. Abu Bakr says that Abd ibn Sulaiman narrated to us on the authority of Az-Zabruqan, on the authority of Abi Razin, who said, indeed, I become sexually impure. And then I make a wudu and I go out to the marketplace and handle my affairs. And so here, Abu Razin is saying that it's okay to be junub and go out in these places. But you saw here, he preferred to make a wudu. And this is what some of them say that you should do. If you're going to be in a state of janabah, whether it's for eating a meal or sleeping or going out, to at least make a wudu, to at least have a partial purity. But the reality of it is that wudu is not necessary here, nor does it remove the hadith. And so therefore, it's permissible to go out even if you didn't make a wudu while in a state of janabah. The next narration, he says, حدثنا بن نمير and عبد الملك and عطاء في الرجل تصيبه الجنابة ثم يريد الخروج قال يتوضأ وضوءه للصلاة. Abu Bakr says that Ibn Numair narrated to us on the authority of Abd al-Malik, on the authority of Ata ibn Abi Rabah, regarding a man who becomes sexually impure and then he wants to go out, right? He wants to go outside after that. To which Ata said he should make wudu the way that he makes wudu for salah. He should make a wudu that he makes for salah. He should make a wudu similar to the wudu that he makes for salah. And so here we see them adding the preferability or the requirement of making a wudu, while I lean to it being a preferable act, not a requirement. He says, حدثنا إسحاق الأزرق and هشام and الحسن في الرجل الجنوبي يأتي الحاجة ويأتي السوق قال يغسل فرجه ويتوضأ وضوءه للصلاة. Here he says that Ishaq ibn al-Azraq, Ishaq al-Azraq narrated to us on the authority of Hisham, on the authority of Al-Hasan, Hasan al-Basri, regarding a man who was in a state of sexual impurity, and then he wants to handle some of his business and go to the marketplace. To which Al-Hasan, he responded, he should wash his private part. And that's an important issue, right? Washing the private part, because the fluids, the sexual fluids that are transmitted are najis, with the exception of semen, according to the stronger opinion. But the juices, the afraz and all of that, one might say that they're najis. The moisture that comes out of the vagina and the pre-cum and all of this, akramakumullah, that fluid is najis, and it will be on his privates. And so if he puts his clothes on, he'll soil his clothes. And for that reason, it's extremely recommended to wash the private parts. And Allah knows best what the medical, professionals have to say about it, reducing, the transmission of, STDs or something like that. But it is extremely encouraged, at least in my view, to wash the private parts after intimacy, even if one doesn't take a ghusl right away. This is just normal hygiene. This is just something that we find being from the normal hygiene of people. And so Al-Hasan al-Basri, he said he should wash his private part, and then he should make wudu, the wudu that he makes for salah. This is the view of Al-Hasan. The next narration, he says, حدثنا إسحاق الأزرق and Hisham and Ikrimah and Ibn Abbas رضي الله تعالى عنهما مثل ذلك أو مثل ذلك. He says that Ishaq al-Azraq narrated to us on the authority of Hisham, on the authority of Ikrimah, on the authority of Ibn Abbas, who had a statement similar to that, similar to that of Al-Hasan. So this is the Sahabi that he's mentioning, Ibn Abbas, who had a statement similar to that of Al-Hasan al-Basri. And then the last narration, he says, حدثنا محمد بن بشر العبدي قال حدثنا مسعر and بكير بن الأخنس and مصعب بن سعد and سعد أنه ربما أجنب ثم توضأ ثم خرج. He says that Muhammad ibn Bishr al-Abdi, he narrated to us, he said that Mis'ar narrated to us on the authority of Bukair ibn al-Akhnas, on the authority of Mus'ab ibn Sa'd. And Sa'd here is Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. If I'm not mistaken, Mus'ab ibn Sa'd is the son of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. Now, Mus'ab ibn Sa'd ابن أبي وقاص الزهري أبو زرارة المدني ثقة من الثالثة أرسل عن عكرمة ابن أبي جهل مات سنة 300. So he says that Bukair ibn al-Akhnas on the authority of Mus'ab ibn Sa'd, on the authority of Sa'd, yani on the authority of his father Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, that he, i.e. Mus'ab, is saying about his father that perhaps from time to time he would become sexually impure, and then he would make a wudu and go outside. And so this is another Sahabi, in addition to Ibn Abbas, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, who would exit the home while in a state of Janaabah. And the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this is very well known, when he gave the salams to Abu Hurairah, and Abu Hurairah ducked away from him, and then came back, and the Prophet questioned him about it, and Abu Hurairah said, I was junub. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, Al-mu'min la yanjus. The believer doesn't become doesn't become religiously impure, najis. And so Abu Hurairah was out and about in a state of being junub. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't criticize him for that or reprimand him for that. Instead, he acknowledged and supported it by saying the mu'min doesn't become junub. You didn't have to, shy away from me in that state. And one might try to argue and say, well, Abu Hurairah didn't have a home. He was from Ahl al-Suffah, so he could either be in the masjid or outside of the masjid. And, to be in the masjid in the state of Janaabah is not recommended. And so this is why he had to come out. Right. And so even with all of that, there could still be an argument. But here you see a large amount of the Salaf who supported that an individual can go out of their home and handle their affairs, to do things and conduct business while in a state of sexual impurity. وبهذا القدر نكتفي إن شاء الله تعالى. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Inshallah, next time we'll pick up with the chapter في الرجل يستدفئ بامرأته بعد أن يغتسل, regarding a man who draws heat from his woman, or who warms himself, i.e. with his spouse, after taking a ghusl. We'll cover that chapter next time, inshallah. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.